1 second here, we're just gonna turn off the admit button so folks can come in without going to the waiting room. Actually, Dan, can you let people in? I don't know how to turn off the admit all button, so if you can figure that out, or just let people in as they jump in. All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. It is 1:02 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, June 8th, 2026. I am Ryan Hazing, the designated federal officer for the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee, otherwise known as the FSCAC. I call this open public meeting of order for FSCAC. Thank you to the community members of the public and members of the public, the FedRAMP team that is joining us today, and everybody else who's listening on the call. This meeting is being held virtually and will be conducted as an open public meeting under the Federal Advisory Committee Act. We are recording this meeting, and a full transcript as well as the recording will be posted to the GSA FSCAC page following today's meeting. For accessibility, we're using the closed caption feature with Zoom. And as the designated federal officer, I'm responsible for ensuring that the meeting follows the approved agenda that was posted to the Federal Register on May 18th, 2026. I will make sure we provide ample opportunity for the public to observe this meeting and provide comment if desired. Finally, I will ensure that the committee operates consistent with applicable laws and policies. I may also adjourn this meeting early if I determine that it is in the public interest. A few quick housekeeping items before we begin. Please keep yourself muted unless you are speaking. Committee members should use the raise hand function or otherwise indicate that they would like to speak. When speaking, please state your name for the record before beginning your remarks. We'll jump to the purpose and outcomes here. I'll note that for the record, the committee currently has 11 active appointed members. The FSCAC roster also reflects 3 current vacancies, 2 agency CISO seats, and 1 large cloud service provider representative seat. GSA is actively accepting applications for open and upcoming FSCAC member seats, with complete applications due by 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, June 12th, 2026. Based on the 11 active members currently serving, quorum for today's meeting is 6 members. Following roll call, I'll confirm the quorum is present and the committee may proceed with today's business. Starting with the chair, Larry Hale.
Here, present.
Thank you. Next, Bronco Boken.
Present.
Vicky Yan Piliteri.
Present.
Bill Hunt.
Present.
Patrick Breen.
Present.
Lawrence Marinelli.
Present.
Carlton Harris.
Present.
Josh Kruger.
Present.
Daniel Payne.
Present.
Rex Booth.
Present.
Adam Schneider.
Present.
Thank you. Based on the roll call, we have 11 members here, so we do have quorum. And we can proceed with business. We will proceed with briefings and public discussion, but will not take any, and if we need to take any formal committee actions, we will take those today as well. Today is the committee's first meeting since in 2026. The purpose is to reconvene the committee, provide a roadmap for the remaining 2026 meetings, brief members on major FedRAMP developments from last year, and begin a focused discussion on how the FSCAC can support agency adoption and reuse of FedRAMP certifications. The desired outcomes are straightforward: First, committee members should leave with a shared understanding of where FedRAMP is today. Second, we want to lay the groundwork for the remaining 2026 FSCAC meetings and the committee's goals. Third, we want to start narrowing where the committee can provide useful advice and recommendations on agency adoption and reuse. Let's jump to the agenda. Okay, so here's today's agenda. We'll begin focusing on public comments following the agenda. Next, Larry Hale, the FSCAC chair, will provide opening remarks. We will then have Pete Waterman, the FedRAMP director, who will brief the committee on major FedRAMP updates over the last year. After, we'll take a quick short break, and Larry will frame expectations and goals for the rest of 2026. We'll then move into a member discussion on what role FSCAC can play in helping agencies adopt and reuse FedRAMP certifications. We will close the meeting at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll now open the public comment portion of this meeting. All written public comments submitted prior to this meeting have been posted to GSA's FSCAC webpage, and those comments have also been sent to the committee members prior to today's meetings. Verbal public comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. If you have a public comment, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom, and when called, please state your name and, if applicable, your organization. Please direct comments to the committee's duties today and today's focus on FedRAMP modernization, agency adoption, and reuse. As a reminder, the committee may consider comments received today and written comments submitted through the FSCAC public comment process. We may not be able to respond to each comment individually during the meeting. I will call speakers in the order provided. So please raise your hand if you have public comments. Are there any public comments? Okay, we have a hand raised.
Can the
If-
public comment be thank you all for bringing the meeting to the community?
That can absolutely be a public comment.
All right, well, that's the meeting for the public record. Thank you all.
Okay. We will go ahead and move on past the public comment stage. If there are public comments that arise later on, we can take those. But for sake of time, we'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda item. I'm going to now turn it over to Larry Hale. And for note, we are running about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. So if we need to make up time or have extra time, we can do so. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Larry Hale, Chair of the Federal Secure Advisory Committee, for opening remarks.
Thanks, Ryan. There we go. All echoes in the room muted. Thanks, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the committee members for being here today. Also want to thank members of the public who've joined us. It has been a while since the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee last met. So part of today is about reconvening, getting the committee reoriented, and making sure we're aligned on where FedRAMP is today and where this committee can be most useful going forward. Today's meeting and the already scheduled remaining meetings for 2026 are intentionally shorter than previously held FSCAC meetings. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, but also efficient and focused. We have a much smaller team supporting the committee this year, so we're structuring the 2026 meetings to be more compact, more purposeful, and more action-oriented. That means less time on the process for the sake of process, and more time focused on the areas where this committee can add real value. As a reminder, the FSCAC is a federal advisory committee established to provide advice and recommendations to the administrator of GSA. By the means of a GSA order, the GSA administrator has delegated authority to myself as the FAS Deputy Assistant Commissioner, as well as to Pete, the FedRAMP Director, to administer the FedRAMP FSCAC responsibilities as outlined in the FedRAMP Authorization Act. We're both very much looking forward to a thoughtful discussion today. The committee brings together perspectives from federal agencies, cloud service providers, independent assessors, security practitioners, acquisition officials, and the public. The purpose is to help improve FedRAMP, reduce unnecessary burden, and support the secure adoption of cloud services across the federal government. For today, our goal is to reset the committee's work for 2026, to hear from Pete on major program updates, and begin focusing the committee's attention on practical work products and recommendations that can help agencies adopt and reuse FedRAMP certifications more effectively. Make sure I'm tracking here. Before we move into the FedRAMP briefing, I want to ground us in the purpose of this committee. The FSCAC charter gives this committee a clear role. We're here to provide advice and recommendations on measures to increase agency reuse of FedRAMP authorizations, reduce burden and confusion for cloud service providers, support more authorizations for small businesses, reduce burden and cost for agencies, and collect feedback on agency implementation of FedRAMP requirements, and serve as a forum for communication across the FedRAMP stakeholder community. That's a broad mandate, but for 2026, I would like us to be very focused. The main driver should be reuse and agency adoption. FedRAMP has already done a lot of work over the past year in reducing the burden of cost, collecting agency compliance, and with a laser-focused approach on facilitating communication with their stakeholders. In practical terms, that means we should be asking what would help agencies trust and reuse FedRAMP certifications more consistently. We should also be asking what would reduce duplicative agency reviews. We should be asking what best practices should agencies be sharing with one another, and what implementation guidance, forums, papers, or recommendations the committee could produce that would help agencies move from understanding FedRAMP modernization to actually using it more effectively. I'll turn back over to our designated federal official to introduce Pete Waterman, the FedRAMP Director, to provide the FedRAMP overview. So Ryan, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Larry. So we invited Pete here today to give a high-level overview and update of FedRAMP happenings over the course of the last year. I know our last meeting was in August of 2025. However, this overview spans back a full year, and Pete has the floor for 55 to 60 minutes, which I know he can use on his own. However, I do encourage committee members to use this as an opportunity to ask questions and directly engage with Pete as needed. Please feel free to use the raise hand feature if you have a pressing question, or you can hold until Pete is finished at the end, and hopefully we'll have some time there to answer questions as well. Pete, floor is yours.
Swap you on
Yep.
All right, there we go. Hey everyone, good to see you after a minute. It has been a while. We've been working on a lot of different things. I do want to emphasize Ryan's comment there. Feel free to interrupt me at any time, ask questions, etc. Although that offer is only open to members of the committee, not the public. Just to be clear, the public's here to watch. As I look at this, it's really interesting to think about just how massively FedRAMP has been able to grow and change its community communication over the past year plus. I think I'm looking here and I see 51 participants, and there was part of me that kind of was like, interesting. We get 6 to 8 times that many number of people watching our monthly community updates. And it just shows how we've been able to build a strong community. For folks that haven't been following along, FedRAMP now runs twice a month community update meetings, one for FedRAMP Rev 5, one for FedRAMP 20X. We typically have between 300 and 500 people at our Rev 5 meetings and 100 to 200 people at our 20X meetings. We've also hosted a significant number of special events, I think around 6 or 7. Those have been super fun, participation from industry, just like really getting a lot of good stuff moving through here. We also meet monthly with our agency liaisons, as well as have agency support groups that are now active to help people work through stuff. And I think over the past year, I've met with the major trade associations that support FedRAMP probably a total of 15 times, something like that, like relatively frequent. There's no doubt in my mind that we have established really strong communication with our stakeholders in a way that's never been really possible before. It certainly wasn't in the past. It's kind of funny looking at the FSCAC, right? Because I don't know, in 2022, 4 years ago, everyone thought it was so important that FedRAMP actually talked to people that they had to put it in the law to talk to people. And now we've moved quite past that a fair bit. So a few things that I want to go over here as we talk through this. I want to let everyone know on the committee, just to be like really transparent here. This is the last like extensive briefing that we plan on giving to this committee. The expectation is that all of you are following along with a massive amount of public material and things that we're producing. So we shouldn't have to brief you. If you're part of this community, you should be paying attention to the key stuff that we're saying, and we should use your time effectively by having you here to participate in conversations and thinking and not just listening to me ramble on. So let's talk about a reminder about FedRAMP. This is something I still like to say a lot, although I'm hoping that we're closer and closer to the time when it just is what it is. But in December of 2022, FedRAMP was reforged in the fires of law. I think one of my pet peeves is that a number of folks like to say that it was codified in law, but it was actually a totally different FedRAMP that was in the law. And a couple years later, at the end of July in 2024, so almost 2 years ago now, OMB rescinded and replaced FedRAMP with an entirely new program. A lot of that new program is aligned precisely with the old program, but it strayed from where people wanted the old program to go. One of the things that has been deeply, deeply frustrating to me in my time in government before being here at FedRAMP, as well as at FedRAMP, is how many members of industry tried to push agencies away from following the guidance and the requirements in OMB Circular A130 and the many, many, many NIST materials, including the Federal Information Processing Standards that bind agencies. And one of the things that we saw there really commonly was this idea that if FedRAMP authorization existed, then there was no need for agencies to follow any of their statutorily mandated and policy requirements. They didn't have to do FIPS 199 and FIPS 200 to categorize information. They didn't have to tailor controls. They could just accept and use this service because FedRAMP had authorized it. That created an intense amount of danger and risk that we've been working really hard to unwind. We very much expect that agencies will follow all of the rules and processes that apply to them, and that they will use the processes and capabilities that FedRAMP applies to cloud service providers that are not federal agencies under our authority in the law to navigate that process. We're really excited about working more and more with agencies to get that done over the course of the next couple of years. So let's talk about the core vision that was in that original memo and how we've gone towards achieving that. The first was that we grounded the program in technical expertise and risk management. Historically, the program was generally not grounded in such. It was all about managing a checkbox-based process. I think I sometimes regret, I will admit, that we chose to call the legacy FedRAMP process Rev 5. We chose that because it aligned with the SP 853 Rev 5 control baselines. But the FedRAMP Rev 5 process refers to a process created by FedRAMP, not NIST. It just has a similar name. The process that was created by FedRAMP included things like mandatory organizational supplied goals by FedRAMP, which goes against the theory of risk management in and of itself. We said if you meet these minimum, do this within 30 days, do this within 2 hours, et cetera, you can meet this goal. That wasn't grounded in technical expertise and risk management. That was creating a checklist for everyone. Another key vision that's been a really strong purpose for all of this is increasing the government-wide availability and adoption of commercial cloud services. This has been something that's been difficult for some of the folks that have been in the FedRAMP game for a while. We do not want government-specific versions of commercial cloud services to be sold to the civilian federal government. The Department of War likes those in some situations, and they're welcome to have those. But for most circumstances, we want the federal government on the civilian side to have access to commercial services with the same quality, capability, features, enhancements, et cetera, as the exact same stuff that's used by everyone else. We don't want a side government service. Third, one of my favorite and also one of the funniest, we're supposed to streamline processes through automation. This, it turns out, is a lot harder than it is to say it. Automating things is not magical. It's not something that just happens. It's something that requires massive investment and changes in approach and methodology. And we've been working hard on that. And re-emphasizing this, like, we can't have gov-only services. It's just no good. So if you can jump to the next slide, let's talk a bit about where we're at right now and just update everyone on the program, what's happening. We are continuing pretty strong at a staffing of around 30 people. We are currently hiring 15 federal staff, assuming that we can pull it off. We just closed our GS-15 application, and our 14 is going to be open till the end of this week, and then we're going to have a few GS-13 positions opening up. It's hard for us to hire because everyone has to be full-time in the office here in DC. So for example, on our GS-15 applications, after being open for 2 weeks, we only had around 100 applications. In the olden days, when GSA would post a remote GS-15 IT specialist position, we would typically close with more than the maximum 500 applications in less than a day. That is just the reality of where we're at right now. I am truly hopeful that we'll be able to find sufficient high quality staff and those that applied who are willing to commit to spending some time with FedRAMP to expand our capabilities here. At the moment, we are expected to spend around $10 million a year, pretty much forever right now. FY28 budget is already been stamped over here at GSA with $10 million, and it'll be really interesting to see where that's going to go. So I share this information as the eternal reminder, gently, to some members of this committee that have been here for a minute and members of the public that have been here for a long time. For a few years, I think the vast majority of the advice that came out of this committee was that FedRAMP should have more money, do more things. That's not helpful advice that is worth any amount of time right now. This is what we're going to have to work with. We're really hopeful that we can continue to rely on industry and agencies, but mostly industry to fill the gap here. One thing I do want to point out, technical staff. As of today, we have 3 people in leadership positions. That's Ryan Hazing, Chief of Staff and Policy Branch Director, Nicole Thompson, our Security Director, and me, the FedRAMP Director. Then we have 5 staff that are engineers and communication staff that build our website and our marketplace capabilities and things like that. And the remaining 23 folks are all doing reviews and technical processes all day long. So even though FedRAMP has 1/3 of the staff today that it had 2 years ago, we actually have almost twice as many full-time active technical reviewers. That's a pretty significant change. We have cut a lot of extra stuff. This slide deck was created by me for a congressional briefing not too long ago and modified for this meeting by Ryan Hazing. That means, we don't have administrative support staff to do convenient stuff. It's all us. So let's talk about what happened over the last year. And as we go through this, I'll remind people, feel free to jump in at any time. Otherwise, I will rant on forever. So I'm not going to read off a bunch of these slide deck bullet points. And we're probably going to get through my part a lot quicker. So we'll be really ahead of time if we don't have a lot of Q&A. But I want to remind everyone that it's currently June 8th. We are less than 2 years from the release of M2415. We have hit a lot of the deadlines in M2415, but most of the government has not. One of my favorite sort of things was that by now every single agency is required to have a GRC automation tool. But that is not the case. In fact, more than a year ago, they were required to have agency policies updated, and none of those policies were updated. So we're working with OMB on a lot of that, and we might even be seeing an update to this memorandum in the near future. What we worked on over the last year was two things. It started as, well, it's really one initiative, right? FedRAMP 20X. FedRAMP 20X is an umbrella name for a modernization initiative of FedRAMP. Originally, the theory was that we would update FedRAMP rules every year so that they were continuously relevant, they were driven by feedback, the process was updated, etc. So that's how it became 20X, was because originally it was 202X, and somebody said, what happens when it gets to 2030? And we said, okay, I guess it's 20X now. Along the way, the 20X, the original intent, the original direction was to replace the FedRAMP Rev 5 process as quickly as possible, to entirely eliminate it and replace it with something that was primarily automation driven, that was optimized for commercial cloud services, and then most importantly was designed to give agency the security signals that they would need to make decisions while following their own agency policies and all of the rules that bound them. We wanted to move away from the idea that an agency would treat a third-party cloud service as if it was a government product. And we didn't want things like system security plans being taken from a cloud service provider and being input by an agency. You know, it's like the meme, like, you made this, I made this. Like, that's not how it works. If you're not responsible and accountable for the control, it shouldn't be in your system security plan. It should be referenced. It should be a service that you're leveraging. We wanted agencies to really focus on building their own system security plans and taking their own risk management approach the way that they're supposed to. And in order to do that, we wanted to optimize the way that they got security signals by ensuring that they had access to real detailed information that they could make a decision on. Importantly, we also wanted to make sure that agencies had access to timely information. Cloud service providers, like federal agencies, are following a maximum bar now rather than a minimum bar. And this is one of the biggest underlying problems. When you tell an agency they have up to 30 days to do something, they will take 30 days to do it. When you tell them to do it as fast as they can, some of them might do it in less than 30 days. This is the same problem that we have with cloud service providers. We tell you that you have to review your security of your service at least once every 30 days. And somehow we got into a world where a bunch of cloud service providers run Nessus scans once a month and think that that's actually securing their service. That is unacceptable, and it's not what we want. So we need to move things towards a model that allowed different risk profiles of cloud services with different risk profiles of agency use cases to all have different requirements set by that organization in alignment with the core principles under the risk management framework. That's what FedRAMP's been building towards. We piloted this with FedRAMP 20X Phase 1. We did a whole bunch of agency stuff. We did our first 20X Phase 1 authorizations. Jump to the next slide. We went through this with 20X Phase 2 into what was previously the moderate impact level. And during this process, we found ourselves in an interesting situation where after endless years of cloud service providers complaining about everything to do with the Rev 5 process, it turned out they didn't, many of them didn't want to actually change the way that they were doing anything. I think the most fascinating example of this to me is the significant change request process, where this is the #1 process that slowed down cloud services and led to government-only versions, was the fact that they had to ask for permission from an agency before they could make a change to their cloud service. We changed that process as directed by OMB. And we created a significant change notification process where cloud service providers could tell their agencies about significant security impacting changes rather than asking for permission in advance. The number one largest scale request for changes to the FedRAMP process. And at this time, this has been approved by the FedRAMP board and in wide adoption for over 6 months, and less than a quarter of the current FedRAMP authorized cloud service providers have adopted this new thing. This process, that situation helped me understand something new, which was that the reality is that many cloud service providers have invested in a process that doesn't change. They don't have budget, funding, personnel, and staffing in order to make change. And it is easier for them to continue along doing the same thing than it is for them to adjust and adapt. On the flip side of that, many of them have told us that the reason they've been unwilling to invest in this is because agencies have told them that it violates FSMA and they will not allow cloud services to do that. For that latter thing, none of that is true. It's not the way either of this works. And this is not even a FSMA thing that has anything to do with significant changes, but is what it is. This is an interesting thing that helped us realize that we have to push very hard in order to modernize Rev 5, or we would continue to have a lot of cloud services stuck on the old processes, not providing value because it was just easy for them to keep doing it the same way. Think about what that looks like in a world where some of the most entrenched cloud services in government use are barely meeting minimum timeframes. They're barely giving vulnerability scans once a month. They're not doing meaningful security and processes in a way that they're sharing, although hopefully they're doing it. And all because they don't want to invest in new reporting mechanisms. And that's deeply troubling. So it's not something that I hope that you all give some time and consideration and thought about. How do we move past that and through that together? Let's go to the next slide and just talk about kind of like the main wins. So on the FedRAMP side of the game, we haven't just told people to do things differently, right? We've also been doing things differently ourselves. I think it's really important for us to point out that we continue to have effectively no review backlog, and that we've entirely eliminated the review backlog back at the end of the last fiscal year. When I started as the FedRAMP director in August of 2024, there was approximately 100+ systems in the review backlog, and the average time was projected to be between 12 and 16 months for those reviews to take place. And it was projected to be at least 6 months before FedRAMP would even look at a package that was submitted to it. It's easy to forget those timelines today, but that's a lot of a reason why people were very upset at FedRAMP at that time. Nowadays, we average less than 30 days. We've been doing it this entire fiscal year. We're somewhere between 22 and 25 days on average over the past 3 quarters. Pretty happy about that. And, fun fact, we actually have not started stopping the clock when we're waiting on customers to do stuff. I thought we would have to do that in order to stay under 30 days. Be like, hey, if we sent you an email asking something and you take 2 days for that to get back to us, I don't want that 2 days counting against my metrics. But so far, everyone's been so responsive that hasn't been a problem. I can't express like how incredible that is and how much fun it is when somebody will reach out to us and be like, hey, we submitted 3 weeks ago. When are we going to get our FedRAMP certification? Like, is it ready yet? And like a whole team every time we just laugh like, yeah, man, we used to tell you that it would take a year and now you're complaining that it's 3 weeks and you haven't heard anything. I love it. I love that we have that problem. That's where we want to be. We've also broke way over 500 certified services with quite a number in process on the agency pipeline. We've had a massive dip, and I am not sure how much industry really tracks this, but we had a massive dip in incoming FedRAMP Rev 5 requests. And I think that's because of 2 reasons. One, it's because you were crazy if you started the FedRAMP Rev 5 process a year and a half ago, right? Because you were just you were looking at a year and a half plus delay after you finished all the work. So I think a lot of people weren't entering the pipeline then. And now people are waiting for FedRAMP 20X. And the result is that we're seeing throughput go way down. So if you jump to the next slide, you can see this graph of our FedRAMP certifications by fiscal year. And you can see that 1 year we got over 60, but otherwise it's been pretty low. Then last year we crushed it out of the park with 140 because we had this massive backlog that we had to deal with. This year is all new submissions. So it's more than, historical years, but it's starting to dry up. We're starting to see only a couple of these come in a month, and we're expecting 20X to go really, really big. So FedRAMP certification wise, one of the biggest changes that we're going to see with the consolidated rules for 2026, and I'm super excited about with FedRAMP 20X, is that we just eliminated the concept of an agency sponsor entirely. And that just means if you build your capabilities, you get your independent assessment, you come and bring this to FedRAMP, we do the review. We sit down, we talk you through it, we confirm it, we write up a little scorecard. We've got a whole process for that. We're expecting to do that in less than 30 days, as long as we don't get like 200 people that submit in the first couple of months when we open this up. But from here on out, we expect that agency authorization will just not really be a thing. We'll expect cloud service providers to come in the 20X route and go that way because it makes sense. It's faster, it's more reliable, it's more consistent. So let's talk a little bit about how FedRAMP's evolved with the community. I mentioned this earlier. That's on the next slide. I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that I think I always want to make sure that people understand is that FedRAMP is a very small program. We're mid-level, led by a GS-15 mid-level program manager way down in GSA, right? We don't have a lot of clout. We're not a big monster machine. We spend a lot of our time. I spend more than, well, these days I don't get to spend as much time as FedRAMP as I'd like. But like when we're focused on FedRAMP stuff, we spend a lot of our time just doing stuff. It's not FedRAMP related, like budget and taking training and doing supervisory stuff and doing data calls on performance plans and all the stuff that just comes with being an org. We're just totally normal, small org, 30 people. We work with a lot of stakeholders. So we meet weekly with the Office of the Federal CIO. In fact, nowadays it's a little more complicated than that because the Federal CIO is also my boss over here at GSA. So depending on how you count it, I meet with the Office of the Federal CIO quite a lot. We meet very often with agency liaisons through support groups and monthly meetings. We meet twice a month with the community. We meet when we can, monthly with the FedRAMP board. We haven't had a functional FedRAMP board off and on for a while because of the fact that so many executives have left and continue to leave. Government these days makes it hard to hold down a FedRAMP board. And now we're hoping to meet with the FSCAC at least 4 more times. Now, I know you've heard that before. Last time we tried to spin the FSCAC up, we really were hoping we would be able to get stuff moving. And we had some great conversations that led to big improvements in the vulnerability detection and response process about POAMs. But unfortunately, we just didn't have the resources to focus back on bringing things back together while things were changing so fast. So we wanted to bring you back and start to have this real focus. Let's jump to the last slide here, which is like, let's talk about communication. This is where I want to kind of lead this into the discussions that you're going to have for the rest of this meeting, which is a reminder that a significant chunk of the responsibility of the expectations of the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee was to force FedRAMP to participate in the community. That is not something that we need from you anymore. I think I would say bluntly, looking at the folks on this call, et cetera, it is likely that aside from some folks here that participate actively in the community in other capacities, I have no doubt that we, FedRAMP, communicate directly with the community in the FedRAMP capacity more than everyone on this call put together. And that's not a dig on you. That's the fact that we have made this our mission. We do that in a lot of different ways. People send me direct emails all the time. Feel free, pete@fedramp.gov. I'm slower than I'd like to respond to some of them, and sometimes I don't get the opportunity to respond to them, but I read them all. They're very helpful. We have a shared inbox, info@fedramp.gov. This is managed by senior staff. I think it's really important that people understand that. This is not just like going through some weird janky AI system. Like sometimes you're getting literally the security director or the chief of staff is reading and responding to those messages into that inbox. It's really important. We get ongoing public feedback through GitHub. We have a lot of cool conversations on GitHub. If you haven't checked it out, you should. We get to have some great conversations with folks there. We publish our blogs. We've been trying to stick to monthly. I think we missed a couple months in there when things got really busy for us, but like that's been our goal, monthly updates. We've done 31 requests for comments over the last year. That's been gnarly, gnarly for everyone, but that was necessary at the pace that we were moving. And we established public notices, which is a new thing. This is where it's not quite a blog post. It's technical. It's detailed. It's not an e-blast. It's not a social media post. It's a public notice, and we've been putting some of those out and finding those to be really helpful as well. And at the end now, we're actually literally building a website in public for updated consolidated rules that people can comment on and see the effect of it. And I think it's really cool when you look at like somebody will put a comment on one of the web pages and they'll say, hey, I think you should add something about this. And over the weekend, I'll add something about that. And then there we go. That content has been improved because of that. That's something that's kind of hard to fathom FedRAMP doing, I think, 2 years ago. And it's just a thing that people take for granted now. And I'm really happy about that. So as we move forward through here, the things that I need help with, that I would like to help understand, is sort of a personal thing, which is, why does everyone always just ask FedRAMP to do it? This has just been like a very difficult thing for me as the FedRAMP director the entire time. It doesn't matter. It's not just the FSCAC. Everywhere I go, I'm going to be doing a closing keynote at RampCon in a couple days, which you should be there. It's going to be a whole bunch of people talking about FedRAMP, but I guarantee you I'm going to be sitting there listening to people steaming as presenter after presenter on the main stage will talk about their good ideas for things that FedRAMP should do for them. And it will just continually be that. FedRAMP should do this. FedRAMP should do that. The thing is, I think we're missing a massive opportunity. I think we're missing a massive opportunity at the industry level, which is, why would you ask someone that doesn't know how to do the thing to create a standardized thing to do that thing? We've been asked recently a number of times, like, why we don't do AI assessments of AI models. Why doesn't FedRAMP create a standardized AI assessment of AI models? Well, first of all, that's NIST's job. Second of all, I'm not an AI guy. I don't have AI guys on my team. I don't have AI people. Like, what are you talking about? Third of all, FedRAMP has spent the last 10 years getting yelled at by every single person for creating standardized ways of doing things that they don't like. So you want me to just create another standardized way of doing model assessment that you'll yell at me about? I don't think so. But why don't agencies or why don't cloud service providers get together and do that? Right? You've got all of the tech, all of the business, all the capabilities. Why don't you get together, create a standardized AI assessment process, and then just tell the government, hey, this is how we're all going to do things together? That's kind of one of the things that I'm really confused about. On the agency adoption side, this is something I hear a lot about too, which is like agencies aren't adopting these changes to FedRAMP. That's not FedRAMP's job to make agencies do things. FedRAMP puts out the guidance and the standards and the policies and then runs our part of it. And then it's up to agencies to implement the other side. Our goal is to make it as easy and as beneficial and as wonderful to agencies as possible. But what we've already seen is that agencies will get investigated and audited. And the irony is that they're afraid of like a FSMA audit if they follow FedRAMP's rules. And now we're starting to see IG and GAO audits where they're getting in trouble because they're not following FedRAMP's approach to using cloud services. And I think that's really important to understand. But at the same time, industry, cloud services, you're out there talking to these agencies all of the time. I think a lot of compliance folks in this space conflate talking with a contractor that works on a compliance thing for an agency with talking to an executive at that agency. But nonetheless, when an agency asks you to do a significant change request instead of a significant change notification, I struggle to understand why cloud service providers don't just say, no, we're going to give you the significant change notification and it's going to be good enough for you because it is a FedRAMP requirement and we meet FedRAMP requirements. And that is what is in our contract, that we meet FedRAMP requirements. And 99 out of 100 times, I guarantee you that agency will be fine with it because it is what it is. So what we want to understand is how can this body help cloud service providers and agencies navigate these processes by providing guidance, white papers, how can we suggest that cloud service providers and trade associations cooperate on things like what are the opportunities here to solve some of these problems? So like how can we get to a world where we understand that it is the expectation that agencies who are interested in using a cloud service begin by categorizing the information that they intend to put in that cloud service. And then they establish the minimum controls that they think are necessary to protect the information in that use case. And then create a system security plan based on that that's tailored to their own personal standardized implementation with their IDP and their SIM and all of this other information. And then they go and look at the available stuff and they buy the cheapest, most wonderful product they can find that meets those requirements. Like that's where we should be. And yet we're still operating in a world where the most modern, high-tech, fastest growing companies in the world that have been mandated by the White House to be used government-wide, we still have agencies that are just like, no, I'm not going to look at that until they're FedRAMP high because it's just a random checkbox. And I guarantee they're not going to look at the package. Once it is FedRAMP high, they're just going to copy and paste it into their systems. We got to fix all this. Help me figure it out.
Cool. Thanks, Pete. Do we have any questions for Pete? I know I had said we would open the floor to ask questions, clarifying questions, additional questions.
see Adam.
Yep. Adam, the floor
You
is
know,
yours.
I'm never quiet, so
Adam,
thanks.
please introduce yourself as well before you ask the question.
Sure, and I'll lower my hands so somebody else can raise theirs. So, yeah, Adam Schneider. I am the independent third-party assessor member of the committee with Coalfire. Pete, thanks for the update there. I don't know if there's an open discussion part of this because Pete, a lot of the things you're saying, I generally agree with. I think part of the challenge that I see happening in the CSPs that I work with is the kind of confusion. I'll call it. It's not resistance. It's probably more like probably a fear element to like the authorization means they're accepting risk at the agency level, but they don't feel like they understand what the risk is necessarily. And I'm not going to opine, but I could see your point on they might not even open the package and read the package, but yet they're saying they don't want to authorize because of something. I'm actually interested from the rest of the committee and those that are in the agencies, kind of their perspective, but I don't know if we have an open forum, but I guess maybe there's a question for Pete and maybe he's allowed to open it up. And Ryan, you can tell us if there can be a broader conversation amongst the committee members here. But I would love to hear, how a CSP, like what are the magic words? Are there magic words for a CSP to push back and tell an agency that it'll be fine? Like we'll we're on this journey together and trust us. Because and I'm not looking for you to have the answer, and I know it's not your job in FedRAMP, but that's the resistance I get, or the concern I get is they put out their Conmon, they ask for the SCN program, the significant change notification program. They may not get a response back. The more progressive ones are now sending an email saying, if I don't hear from you in 30 days, we're going to move to this. And then they just start doing it because they don't have enough agencies. So if that's the move, like that's what we've been telling our some of our customers that really want to move down that path. And then there are a few agencies out there that have just said no, like 20X isn't on the table for us right now. We're going to do it a little bit different. And so I guess I'd love your feedback on that because I would love to guide my customers on how to push faster, quicker changes. They want to get to commercial parity, just like I think a lot of the agencies would love. But I'll stop. Maybe there can be an open conversation, but maybe not. So I'll let you answer that, Pete.
No, Adam, absolutely. I can open the floor for an open discussion around this, and I'll pass it over to Pete. We do have a dedicated discussion later to talk about agency reuse. But if you want to keep this to be a little bit more open, we have plenty of time with the agenda, so that is fine.
Yeah, the thing I always say here is actually really simple, which is, what are you legally required to do? And this is something that is a real problem for a lot of compliance folks. Just like it happens, ironically, the same in the government side, is that you have compliance folks that are talking to each other, and they're not talking to their lawyers. They're not talking to their contract lawyers. They're not talking to their business agreement lawyers. They're just arguing with each other. That is inane. So the question to every cloud service provider is, what does your contract say? If you have written into your contract that you will do something, then you must meet what is in that contract. So for example, if your contract says that you will notify CISA in the event of an incident, then you have to notify CISA in the event of an incident. It doesn't matter if FedRAMP says, hey, we want the agencies to notify CISA, not cloud service providers. It's in your contract that you have to do it, so you have to do it. It's the same thing for this stuff. Does your contract say that you must do significant change requests? I bet some people have those contracts. Those people need to work with their lawyers to understand what they have to do. On the other side, the vast majority of the contracts that we've seen are the opposite. The vast majority of the contracts are, you must maintain a FedRAMP certification. It must be maintained by following FedRAMP rules. You must do the rules that FedRAMP tells you to do. Therefore, when FedRAMP says you must change from one old process to a new process, you don't have to argue that out at the compliance level. You are risking your FedRAMP certification and breach of contract by not following FedRAMP rules. So you're like, the cloud service provider is bound in this case. Now that's a change, right? Before, these were optional for Rev 5 cloud service providers. And so you could say, oh, FedRAMP isn't making me do it. But that's one of the reasons why we're now making everyone do it over the course of the next 1.5 to 2 years, or next 1.5 years, is because you have to do it. We want certified providers to be doing this. This is the expectation. So I think that's the support that we're offering on the FedRAMP side, is you get to go and say, if I don't do this, I'm going to lose my FedRAMP certification. You're going to be illegally operating a cloud service that lost its FedRAMP certification. We're going to be in breach of contract. No, we're going to follow FedRAMP's rules. Thank you. Like that's what it should be. But always talk to the lawyers. You got to know what your company agreed to do.
It's a good perspective. I would love to hear from some of the agency folks on the committee, your reaction to that, because I know there's different perspectives. This could be you and me, Pete.
As we go off camera, like we'll just go into the agency or in the FSCAC discussion without me from here on out. How about that?
Bill.
Hey, Bill Hunt, Securities and Exchange Commission. Y'all know I love a good fight, so let's go at it. From where I'm sitting, like agency, so y'all have seen the thing I posted on LinkedIn, the little meme there. It's basically like the technology doesn't work, and then the people don't have the skills, and then we don't have the budget to do it anyway. And it's this like constant rotating cycle over and over again in the federal government. And it's like where you are in the cycle just depends on the day. Federal government just went through massive cuts of staffing, and all the smart folks who are security related and engineer related like left. They went to go get other jobs, or they got shown the door and they went to go get other jobs. One way or another, those people all left. Our cybersecurity folks, for the most part, don't understand any of the things that you just said. The lawyers at the agencies, they have no idea what any of this stuff means. So just being brutally honest here, like y'all might be doing 20x, we're still doing 18x over here, and we would love to catch up at some point. But we're years away from that. Like, we have not done the upskilling necessary for people to understand that gap and to be able to close the gap between the two things that you're talking about. So like, that is a long way off from here. Like, I'm still trying to, I shouldn't say this, I'm gonna say it. I'm still trying to convince our security people that like self-attestation is not a replacement for security, right? I would love to get like all of the like OSCAL data like flowing into Archer natively. I think most agencies are using Archer. I would love for it to just be like flowing and it just work and my SSP just magically shows up and I don't have to do anything, but like we're not there. Like we are a long way away from there. So like if we were talking about this, I will say the problem is skills and budget. The federal agencies do not have those things to close that gap, and until that changes, like we aren't going to change our policies around it. We are not going. We're maybe we'll smile and nod when the vendor says we're going to go do this thing because we don't know what it means. But for the most part, like that gap is significant today at every single agency, and there are very few that I think can close that gap with where we're at. Like that's what I'm seeing.
Thank you, Bill. Lawrence Marinelli.
Hi, Lawrence Marinelli. I'm the Department of War authorizing official for clouds. I just want to, I don't want to make this a Department of War specific thing. I'm just offering a couple thoughts, right? And it's kind of been commented to before that, this is a major shift in how people would traditionally do things. I think part of the gap in understanding is how to correlate a lot of the 20X initiatives to the traditional NIST controls may help agencies understand really where the risks are coming into play and how it may affect them. But I understand it's not going to be a clean mapping, especially down to the CCI levels, which is understandable. But that could be a way forward for people to be a little bit more open to adopting some of these things, right? Significant change notifications. It's a great idea. I understand the reasons why FedRAMP is going that direction. On the Department of War side, I have separate initiatives that we're going to essentially end up at the same place where we can do significant change notifications. But because of our mission space, we do need to go a few layers deeper than what the traditional federal government needs to do. But that's our ultimate goal as well. But, traditionally we have, accepted FedRAMP authorizations. And that gave us a level of assurance that things were validated and looked at to a specific level. Under the 20X construct, it's going to be slightly different. Definitely looking forward to seeing what those final mappings could be between FedRAMP and the DoD, so that we can start trying to retailer what we're doing around this space to get people a lot quicker. Trust me, I don't enjoy seeing massive backlogs since I took over as a over here, but so that is definitely high on my priority list.
You want to just take over
Thank-
the speakers?
Thanks, Lawrence. Rex.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And thanks, Pete, for the thoughts. Look, as far as the 20X program goes, and looking at the data that you showed, the improvement in response time is it's tremendous. It's admirable. And speaking as a CSP, we certainly appreciate it. The 20X program, though, I guess two questions, right, related to each other. So number one, that shrinking backlog, I imagine that is mostly due to the 20X program, or is that inclusive of all kind of authorization requests at this point? And then two, my understanding is that the 20X program is currently available for low and moderate systems, not for highs. If that understanding is correct, at what point do highs get included in the 20X program, or is there a plan for that?
I'll pass it back over to Pete to answer those questions.
Yeah. This is very awkward, the way that we're handing laptop speakers back and forth here. Yeah, so Rex, there's a couple components to this. So this is where it gets really confusing, and I understand this, and like is what it is, where 20X is an umbrella code name for the long-term modernization project of FedRAMP. It's also a type of FedRAMP certification.
Yeah.
So the backlog that was eliminated was the FedRAMP Rev 5 backlog. It was the legacy FedRAMP packages. We're still seeing those coming in, a few of those a month, but the transition period will move towards FedRAMP 20X. I think we have, if you go to fedramp.gov/20X, there's a phased implementation chart. We're in phase 3 right now. The intent is that by the end of FY26 Q3 or Q4, we've now set a target date of June 11, 2027 will be the last day that we will do new FedRAMP Rev 5 authorizations or certifications. So the theory is that Rev 5 will be replaced and it will just stop to exist. Now, there's a secondary transition period for the people that currently have FedRAMP Rev 5 authorizations, like or certifications. How long will those last? I don't have an answer to that right now, mostly because I'm not going to make that decision. I'm waiting to receive direction from the White House as to what to tell all of these companies to do. But I expect there's a pretty good chance that the White House will direct us in the relatively near future to terminate the FedRAMP Rev 5 program entirely, including current authorizations within the next 2 to 3 years. So the consolidated rules for 2026 are going to get finalized at the end of this month. They have all the requirements for Class A, Class B, and Class C certifications. Those are roughly analogous to the underlying requirements that align with a FIPS 200 low and moderate at Class B and Class C. Class A is intended for pilots, testing, negligible risk stuff, et cetera. As soon as we get those rules out, start opening those pipelines, we're going to transition to a FedRAMP 20X high test. So that will be a Class D for FedRAMP 20X. We'll do that pilot. We'll build that system out. At the same time as we're doing the Class D pilot, I expect that we will also be piloting the addition of non-native cloud controls to 20X, because right now 20X is designed for, I am built on a FedRAMP certified IaaS or PaaS. Not for running your own data center and things like that. We expect to add all of that in so that by the beginning of next year, there should be a full set of paths based around the 20X approach. And as the eternal reminder goes, the 20X approach is based on the SP 853 Rev 5. It is very much based on NIST approach. We have simply taken a lot of very specific individual controls and enhancement, and we've put them into more broader statements that allow them to be addressed at the same time. So the NIST controls are often very, very precise, which you love, but then there can be a lot of them, right? There can be a control. You have to have a spreadsheet and it has to have a column for the name. And then there's another control that says you have to have a spreadsheet and it has to have a column for the date. And then another control, you have to have a spreadsheet, it has to have a column for, the location. And we just say you should have spreadsheets to track name, dates, and locations. So it's the same requirements are in there. It's just phrased differently, and it's intended to be more palatable for a commercial security program. So all of that, theoretically, if we're successful and are able to push through this and have the support of some, extra pushes from the White House that align with this direction, because some of these decisions are much bigger than me, that's what we're looking at. That can change in a lot of different ways, but the expectation would be that by this time next year, there's no need for any new Rev 5 certifications at all.
Makes sense. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions related to the topics that we're discussing now? We are running still about 15 minutes ahead of schedule, but we can always lengthen the open discussion after the break if that is what we need to do. Bill, go ahead.
Bill Hunn, SEC still, at least for now. Pete, you'd said earlier that a lot of agencies still aren't using a GRC. Do we have numbers on that? Because this is the first I'm hearing that folks are still struggling with that.
So I think I would say a lot of agencies aren't using modern GRC tools. We still have a lot of people using Archer and older versions of Archer where they're literally opening up it's easier for them to track stuff in spreadsheets, and then they open up the spreadsheet on one window and Archer on the other window, or like, not to, you know, throw shade at specific brands. They open up their like legacy GRC platform and then manually data enter stuff in and
Yeah.
things like that. To be fair, like we're at a weird place in the ecosystem where we are asking cloud service providers to supply information in a format that agencies don't really have large scale tooling to read. And part of that is there's a few reasons for that. One, we can't ask agencies to procure something that will just sit on the shelf and wait for years for cloud service providers to adopt it. That's a waste of federal money all across the board, right? I mean, as of OSCAL has been around for 1700 years, and like one or two cloud service providers have packages available in OSCAL. So like, why would you buy a tool that does OSCAL when you're going to get it in a Word doc anyway? So we're going to kind of short circuit some of that in the consolidated rules. We mentioned this in some former public notices, but we're going to supply very basic JSON schemas for some of the materials. And the intent there is just like validate your JSON against this JSON schema. It should be relatively easy. And we got like core metadata about the platform in that structure. It's not anywhere near the complexity and nuance of something like OSCAL, but it will let us pull information. And the first stage of that on the FedRAMP side, I'm kind of excited about this. Like, it's just like the marketplace. So the marketplace right now is you want to change like a service description, you send us an email, ask us to change the service description. We want cloud service providers to just have a JSON file on their webpage that we'll just pull every day. And like, you want to change your service description, you change it. We'll pull it. Like, why are we having people do that? So that's like the entry into that. But we also hope there's another problem here, which was that it wasn't possible to get a modern GRC tool FedRAMP certified before, because agencies would be like, we're not going to use you because you're not FedRAMP authorized. The JAB wouldn't do them because like there wasn't a lot of use cases for it. So it created kind of like a chicken and the egg situation. Now I think over the 20X pilots, we've got like 15 GRC, modern GRC tools. Some of these like they do things like there's one tool that these guys like over the weekend just created scripts to import every public 20X package. Like that's the type of thing that we can do with modern tools. Like it's very simple. So we're hoping that agencies will get more access to that stuff over the next couple of years, but we still have that same problem as they're like, my contractors would rather just get an email with the Word doc, and we'd rather just download it from there because it's easy and that's what we know. And we don't want to use a tool to do it. So we got to navigate that.
Well, I mean, I think part of that is obviously that the contractors have us over a barrel and that like make work is like huge, you know, like that's why these things keep happening over and over again. And we've got contractors that say, no, we have to do it this way. But the other side of it, you know, I think that there are opportunities, especially if you're meeting with my former colleagues over at OSCIO, to push the agenda of forcing adoption of more modern tooling across the federal government. I mean, you know, like that's certainly something that can happen, whether it's a commercial solution or whether the federal government wants to create their solution to close the gap. We can force those things and mandate it. I mean, CISA does it all the time. So the rest of us go along for those rides. It certainly could be done to start closing those gaps, but you know, I'm still a dreamer. You know, I've been working on, you know, the OSCAL or some version of that for over a decade, almost a decade now. And would still love to see that end-to-end just magical connective tissue where I can just go type it in the box and all of a sudden my SSP is done and I don't have to think about any of the inherited control nonsense. So, I mean, I'm still a big proponent of that, whatever we can do to start pushing that agenda harder. But again, whatever we can do to move more of the humans out of the way of that work, I think we get there faster. So, yeah, if y'all are talking with the policy side of the house, setting those standards on that side, along with, you know, working with category management at GSA to make vehicles available for us to go buy it. I mean, we'll just go do it if we're told to do it.
Yeah, I think we've all had a unique firsthand seat at watching a thing like that play out over the last 9 months, where GSA negotiated $1 deals for some of the most like fancy modern tech on the planet, and OFCIO and OMB spent and executive orders like directed wide scale agency use of it. And here we are. I mean, I think not to give too much, like, there was a pretty serious expectation that every single agency would have deployed at least one or two of these capabilities by January. And yet here we are in June of 2026, and the vast majority of agencies haven't deployed any of these capabilities that are available through these new models. They're still just using the things in their, in their like major IaaS provider, which has been very interesting to see. So I certainly, I share that from the perspective of you can make it basically free, you can provide high level top cover to do it, and agencies still won't be able to do it for all sorts of reasons sometimes.
Well, I mean, the all sorts of reasons here, and I'm not going to get into the politics of that particular boondoggle, but at the end of the day, like asking everybody to go use something when they've already got a contract to do it that already exists elsewise, and also they would have to spend $1 million to get it authorized to use in their agency, probably wasn't going to be the slam dunk that everybody thought. In this case, though, I think you can mandate saying like all new tooling, everybody has to have the GRC. We've already got that in policy, but it must do A, B, C, D, F, G, or it does not count. Like, I think that's a simple modification. OMB throws in a memo, and then we are all required to upgrade to the latest version. The vendors win because now they can sell us a more expensive product. Yeah, it's kind of a win-win for everybody involved in this. That would be my pushback here. But I do think what you're discussing is slightly different scenario than what we're talking about here. Although, yes, we're going to hug our ancient version of Archer until we die. That's the thing that we're going to try and do until we're told by OMB to do otherwise. So I appreciate your position.
Fair enough. And like that's also a thing where like recommendations that come out of this committee do get sent to Congress. And while the GSA administrator and the FedRAMP director won't be able to have the influence to make something like that happen, certainly Congress could.
Are there any more open comments for discussion? It sounds like we're moving in the way of recommendations, so I'll give folks a minute to raise their hand, provide comment. If not, we can take a 5-minute break and we'll come back just 5 minutes early.
Let's do it.
Great.
Break.
All right, we'll take a 5 minutes break. We'll come back and reconvene at 2:20. So actually a 6-minute break here. That way we can come back at a clean number. Hello, folks on the call. We're going to give it another minute or two, as our chair needed to step out for a second, and as soon as he's back, we'll get started.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you're all back and I can be heard. I can see that that my mic is working. So for the rest of today, I want to shift the committee from briefing mode, thank you, Pete, into work planning mode. The central question for us today is what role can this committee play in helping to increase reuse and agency adoption of FedRAMP certifications? I want us to be practical. A useful answer might be a recommendation memo. It might be a short best practices document for agencies. It might be a forum or listening session. It might be a set of agency implementation principles. It might be advice on acquisition language, authorization package reuse, continuous monitoring practices, ConMon practices, or how agencies should think about CR26 implementation. What I do not want is for this to become simply a request for FedRAMP to brief us again, or a list of things we're tasking FedRAMP with. FedRAMP has provided the context. Our job as a committee is to decide where we can provide advice, where agencies can change behavior, and where stakeholder experience can be translated into concrete recommendations. To guide the discussion, I'd like the members to think about 3 questions. First, where does agency reuse still break down, even when a cloud service is FedRAMP certified? Second, what could agencies, acquisition officials, or authorizing officials do differently to make reuse more routine? And third, what specific product should FSCAC aim to produce during the remaining 2026 meetings? And by that, I mean, what output should this committee be providing during those remaining meetings that we're having this year in 2026? I want to use this slide to frame the central question for the rest of today's discussion.
Oh, that's the one.
Are we up on the right slide? There we are. And really for the rest of the FSCAC's work in 2026, what role can this committee play in helping to increase reuse and agency adoption of FedRAMP certifications? FedRAMP spent the last year making significant changes to its own processes. The program has been modernizing reviews, advancing FedRAMP 20X, and increasing public engagement, releasing RFCs and public notices, improving transparency, and moving toward the consolidated rules for 2026. These changes are important, but the full value of FedRAMP modernization depends on agencies actually using and reusing FedRAMP certifications in a consistent and confident way. Reuse is not just a FedRAMP process issue, it's also an agency behavior issue, policy issue, a procurement issue, of course, a risk management issue, and a trust issue. So I would ask the committee to focus today on practical actions that could help agencies rely on FedRAMP certifications more consistently. Again, I want to be crystal clear about the kind of discussion we're trying to have. The goal is not simply to task FedRAMP with producing more information, more reporting, or more briefings. FedRAMP will continue to brief this committee and provide updates, but the unique value of the FSCAC is broader than that. If we as a committee feel we need to bring in agencies or cloud service providers who are having an issue with agency adoption, we can consider doing that. The goal today is to identify what we as a committee, agencies, and the broader stakeholder community can do to reduce friction and increase reuse. So that could include agency reuse best practice papers. It could include a short guide on what good FedRAMP reuse looks like. It could include forums or listening sessions with agency AOs. It could include peer sharing sessions between agencies that are reusing FedRAMP effectively and those that are still working through the challenges. It could include recommendations on how agencies can reduce duplicative reviews. It could include common principles for evaluating and accepting FedRAMP certifications. It could include practical guidance for acquisition officials on how to account for FedRAMP in procurements. Or it could include a paper identifying the most common barriers to agency adoption and potential solutions. As we discuss this, I encourage members to think about where agencies are still hesitant. Do they understand what a FedRAMP certification means? Do they trust it? Do they trust the certification package? Are they adding duplicative agency-specific requirements? Are their acquisition teams and their security teams aligned? Are the AOs comfortable relying on FedRAMP's work? Are agencies treating FedRAMP as reusable or only as a starting point for another full review? I also encourage us as members to distinguish between issues FedRAMP can solve directly and issues that require changes in agency practice, policy, procurement, or culture. This committee is valuable because we bring together perspectives from agencies, cloud service providers, independent assessors, security practitioners, acquisition officials, and the public. That mix of perspectives should help us identify barriers that no single group can fully see on its own. So for today's discussion, I'd like to focus on concrete ideas rather than broad observations. What should we produce as a committee this year that would actually help agencies change behavior? And what can you, committee members, take back to your own communities to improve adoption? So by the end of this discussion today, I'd like to start identifying a couple of priority reuse topics for the committee to focus on based on this fundamental question. We should also consider whether a smaller group of members should help develop a draft work product before the next meeting. The goal is to keep FSCAC focused on outputs that are realistic, actionable, and useful in 2026. So with that framing, I'd like to open the floor for committee discussion. Ryan and I will help track themes and possible outputs. Again, we'd like to walk away from this discussion period with a foundation of a couple of topics that we could use to elaborate and build on that would help with FedRAMP certification, reuse, and adoption. The intent is not to create a punch list of things we want FedRAMP to do, but rather what we can do as a committee to help increase agency adoption. So for the committee, from your perspective, what's the biggest barrier that still prevents agencies from relying on FedRAMP mandates and reusing FedRAMP certifications? Please raise a hand and we'll call on you. I'll repeat the question. What's the biggest barrier that still prevents agencies from relying on FedRAMP materials and from reusing FedRAMP certifications? Thoughts? Okay, let me see. I've lost my Bill, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, let me start with I concur that lorem ipsum continues to be a plague and a scourge across the government and something that we should fight every chance we get. But more directly, let me poke at this in two specific areas so that we can have a constructive conversation. Number one, why does GSA think that reuse is still a problem? Number two, Pete basically just told us that we're superfluous and add nothing to the conversation because they're talking to the customers every single day. So what uniquely do you all need from us that you're not getting? That's my question back to you all. Why do you think this is a problem? And thus, what are we trying to fix? Because from where I'm sitting, we're already mandated to reuse them. We have no choice in the matter now. So that's happening. So why do you all think it's not happening? And number two, what unique differentiator that we provide that you all aren't getting elsewhere?
So I think, and thank you, Bill. I think the unique differentiator is the blend of communities and stakeholders that comprise this committee. But definitely appreciate your perspective. And let me turn to Bronco, who has his hand up, and then we can roll back into the discussion. Bronco.
I probably still need to think more about what I was going to say after Bill's comment, but two barriers that immediately jump on me is communication, because we're still talking reuse, but I'm not hearing that certification can be reused for authorizations. Certification is just a feed that informs agency authorizations that still need to happen, that are still independent. So there is no reuse. And then we still have that language of presumption of adequacy that is still not clear how that plays the role in certification / authorization / reuse. And then to directly answer your question, the biggest barrier that I still think is valid is the IG community. I still think that there is a big disconnect with how IG community understands and interprets the mandates and guidance versus what's really out there. And if there is something we could help potentially maybe focus on helping connect the dots between FedRAMP agencies and their IG communities.
I'm gonna give Pete the opportunity here to weigh in on both Bill and Bronco's comments and questions.
For Bill's question, one of the common points of feedback that we hear from industry is that agencies aren't following the rules. And so like, I think we've all seen this. We were joking earlier here in this room that like, if a law was passed tomorrow that said every agency had to paint their front door green, 10 years from now, there would still be hundreds of agencies without green front doors. So like mandates, laws, rules, it's kind of irrelevant. So how can industry especially help agencies navigate these changes? To Bronco's point, there's a fundamental misunderstanding that is continuous in the FedRAMP program. What is reused are the assessment materials and the process. So FedRAMP is established in law to create a process for the security assessment and ongoing monitoring of commercial cloud services. When a FedRAMP does a certification, it means that we have reviewed a certification package full of materials, including an assessment that can be used by an agency in their authorization to operate process to use that cloud service. And the presumption of adequacy explicitly applies to the materials and the assessment. It does not apply to a authorization. This is very important. It's like the laws, the wording is the presumption of like the materials and the assessment that lead to a FedRAMP certification is adequate, should be presumed adequate for use by an agency to make an authorization determination. So the theory then is that the agency also absolutely 100% has the accountability, responsibility, and the opportunity to say it's not adequate. It be due to specific use cases, right? They can say, in my use case, I want to know more things. In my use case, I don't like this. In my use case, I would like to pay you to do something differently. That's totally fine and encouraged as long as that's documented and shared with FedRAMP, which is required by M2415. But so when we talk about a FedRAMP certification, like that's the point, is we're providing you with a package of materials that is good enough for an agency to run its RMF process without having to go to the cloud service provider and be like, hey, how do you guys do this? How do you do that? What do you do about this? What do you do about that? Instead, those materials and that assessment is there. So as we talk about reuse, that's what we're talking about, especially when it comes to FedRAMP 20X, as well as when it comes to all of the new changes about things where vulnerability detection and response. Cloud service providers are used to receiving agencies are used to receiving a POAM spreadsheet so that they can copy and paste it into their own POAMs, which is not how it works. It's not how it should work, right? We talked about that last time we met. So moving forward, we would like cloud service providers to provide agencies with information on their vulnerabilities, and then the agency determines if there is sufficient situation that the agency needs to establish a POAM. This like carries forward forever. So when we talk about how to help agencies reuse these services, there could be a lot of different things to talk about and approach. One just very simple example that I'll put out was that 6 months ago, FedRAMP did not intend to create standardized schemas for any of these materials. We just were like, hey man, here's the 6 pieces of information you got to include in this, you do you. But we had so much feedback from agencies that like they would not be able to process it if they got 12 different spreadsheets with 12 different column names. So we're gonna go ahead and provide some column names for the spreadsheets and things like that. Like what other materials like that can we do? But again, going back to the thing, and I'm really supposed to kind of back out of it at this point, but given the context there, I felt like jumping in. How do cloud service providers help agencies make it easier to adopt these changes as they employ them?
Bill, I'll give the floor to you, but before we do that, I do want to remind folks that this is an opportunity to provide discussion around actionable things that either the FSCAC can do or the community. We will have, 3 meetings over the course of the next few months, and we can always make those meetings longer if this one seemed to be too short, but we want to make sure that we're getting actionable items that we can piggyback off of and build for future meetings. So Bill, the floor is yours.
Well, I mean, that's no pressure. We just have to fix everything. Nope. Easy enough. I will reiterate my previous comment then, and say that if the goal here is for us to solve the problem of reuse and reusability, the problem remains that there is a gap between what our security contractors are being expected to do and the tooling and the actual Fed staff security teams. Like there's a multi-hops problem here where we are basically copying and pasting, to Pete's point, from an Excel document into a other tool, and there's an incentive for the security team that is generally vendors in the middle, contractors, to do make work exercises in the middle of all of that. And so there's a lot of bring me a rock exercises. I'm at my 5th government agency now, and I've seen this every place I've been. Like it's literally that contract continues to exist under the auspices of being able to have work to do. If there's not work to do and the tooling solves it, then why does that contract exist? So we get into that circular problem. So the contractors are going to find things and they're going to pick apart the language any way that they can, and presumption of adequacy gets thrown out the window immediately. It happens over and over again. So I think if we want to close some of these gaps, one area I would propose we continue to look is how do we get the tooling to solve the problem? If we're already getting the documentation from the vendor over here, then why are we having somebody whose job is to copy and paste it into the tool? Why doesn't the tool just absorb all of that information without us having to do any of that? Then I will point out we have to focus on the remaining 40% of the controls that the agency is responsible for and that cannot be part of the automated part of that. Part of those are also going to be inherited, so we're going to need to think about multiple inheritance. I don't know if the tools are doing a great job of that today, but something to think about. Like I'm getting my AWS controls over here, and I got to get Entra for my identity management over here. Like all this stuff has to flow together, and we have to think about that. I don't know how well Archer does it these days, or whatever people are using. But point being, we continue to have a people problem because the tools are insufficient.
Thank you, Bill. Bronco, let's go ahead and go with you. And
Just-
other folks, please weigh in if you just put your hand up if you have comments.
Just a quick correction, Ryan. I don't know if you're taking the notes. Not IT, IG community. It's the auditors, because this is still a one big compliance exercise, and agencies are still guided or driven by the IG expectations.
And Bronco, thank you for that. How can we, do you have ideas on how we can bridge that gap and engage the IG community to better educate them?
Again, we're an advisory body. I don't know. I know in the past we had some ideas to develop content, and that didn't work out. I can't remember exactly why. Content in terms of guidance and anything other than recommendations for the either GSA administrator or FedRAMP director, but we could come up with recommendations or find ways to again connect these 3 disparate communities, either through FedRAMP Day or other forums.
Thank you. Other hands? Okay, we'll move on. All right,
Oh, sorry, Larry, I raised my hand late there.
go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, this is the simple answer. I don't know what output we want to create, but it's education, right? What I'm hearing is agencies need to be educated, maybe even along the lines of what Pete told us earlier. Like, we set the rules, the CSPs follow the rules, you have to accept the rules. There's like, that's the law. I don't know, like, how we as a committee help with that education. Maybe, like you said, maybe we do a series of white papers, and then I would even turn it around and say we should educate the cloud providers and the 3PAOs on, what are the how do you address it if um, if an agency pushes back on following the FedRAMP guidance that has been published, and the fact that you're meeting the FedRAMP requirement, but they're still not accepting your package or your SCN approach or whatever. I think that would be those are the useful things that I know as a 3PAO, I'd love to be able to go to my CSPs and say, look, you're getting pushback. Here's the 3 things we should send to the agency to help them get educated. That might have been the same things that we created out of this committee to educate them, but it kind of is let's create a set of artifacts to educate, FAQs, et cetera, for the agencies, and then a set of artifacts, FAQs, white papers for the CSPs and 3PAOs of how to address, because maybe the agencies aren't paying attention to what we're creating, but it gives them a way to share that information with those agencies so that when there is pushback and we say we're going to do it the way FedRAMP told us to, there's standing behind it that we can point to and say came out of, these are the requirements. So those are the things that I think of. It's just, how do we better educate all the communities around us?
Thanks, Adam. And you've stimulated some more hands coming up. We'll go with Rex first and then Vicky.
Yeah, just 2 quick thoughts. So one, building off Bronco's observation that engaging the IG community could yield some benefits. I think the force multiplier there is to engage with SIGI, which is their kind of central clearinghouse for IGs. A lot of opportunity there for some efficiency in communications. They're really good at getting the word out to the IGs. Second, kind of building off of what Adam just mentioned, I do want to point out that with the exception of perhaps only the largest CSPs, most CSPs are not going to push back on their agencies about, hey, you're not following, kind of FedRAMP rules. It's not realistic to have a vendor kind of put themselves in that position where they're feel like they're risking the contract or the relationship with the customer in order to gain some efficiency in terms of how the program is executed. So for as much as I think that arming them with information about how the program is supposed to run is a good idea so that they know, the actual kind of I guess course correction for agencies cannot be expected to come from the CSPs. It has to come from somewhere else. Where that comes from, may leave that to others, but it won't come from the CSPs.
Thanks, Rex. Vicky.
So I agree with Bronco and Adam and Rex that we do kind of have an education and awareness issue across all stakeholders. I think the way that Pete speaks about kind of the roles and responsibilities and expectations of the different stakeholders is pretty clear. However, I think agencies are left to interpret the language in law, and most people in the security space are not lawyers. So I think having, in terms of a tangible output from this discussion, perhaps audience-focused FAQs or explanations of the expectations and roles and responsibility, especially the presumption of adequacy, the intended purpose of reuse, and ultimately what the agency is still responsible for. As Pete has been crystal clear, FedRAMP accepts no risk. They can provide this resource and access to the marketplace to different cloud services and vendors, but they ultimately accept zero risk. So I, speaking on behalf of a federal agency, don't know many agencies that will just go in with whatever security is there in place without having their own expectations on top. And I think this is something that needs to be very clear to the agencies in order to optimize the reuse as and understand what they're opting into.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, very well said. Additional thoughts on the first discussion topic? We've got some great seeds for next steps there. I appreciate that very much. The next topic I'd like to bring up is and this the answers may be the same that we just discussed, but what would help agencies adopt certified cloud services faster while still preserving, as Vicky mentioned, appropriate agency risk management? And are the answers exactly the same? Vicky first, and then Daniel.
Work at NIST, so obviously have our own equities in mind here. But I believe actually FedRAMP 20X has missed an opportunity by using the new criteria as that entry point and then providing cloud service providers the time, some set amount of time to achieve baselines. The agencies rely on the baselines, whether it's intended or not, and that provides the level of assurance that will allow for faster adoption. So I do understand the mandate to increase the size offering of the marketplace, get products to the hands of agencies faster. But without that assurance, I think broadly agencies are not going to accept that risk because, again, as Pete has said many a time, FedRAMP is not accepting any risk. Agencies know your own risk. But then if being forced to buy an off-the-shelf commercial product as is, that does not necessarily meet the unique mission needs, the risks of each individual agency.
Thanks, Vicky. Daniel, and then Bill in the queue.
How's it going? Daniel Payne from Databricks. I guess, and that brings up an interesting point for Victoria. Like, I know every single agency is going to have their own acceptable risk. There's going to be a risk profile. They're going to have acceptable risk postures and a risk appetite. I guess it's always difficult to try and figure out what agencies are actually looking for and how they're reviewing these packages. You know, I can deliver it in any format that an agency requires, whether it's OSCAL, whether it's a PDF, whether it's a Word doc or whatever. You know, we're gonna get it to our customers in the way that they want it. But I guess, like, how are they looking at the risk, right? Like, what different agencies have different, you know, methodologies and processes for looking at this. Sometimes it might be like the active user. Sometimes it might be like steps away, as Bill mentioned. I guess, like, how can we ensure that, you know, acceptable risk is sort of the same across the board in some way, shape, or form? It's kind of an impossible task, and maybe that's like the impossible question that I'm posing. But, you know, I want to kind of see, like, I have my ways of looking at different packages and kind of analyzing risk. Maybe there needs to be some sort of standardized approach to looking at the risk. Like, you should look at these documents, you should look at this, you should look at this. You know, because sometimes we've seen people look at our packages and say, like, you have too many POEM items. Well, we're a large system. Or maybe you have 5 POEM items, but there's a really big risk in there. You know, or, you know, some people look at the SSP and your stuff isn't quite up to par. But is that really the risk that you should be looking at? I guess, you know, we kind of almost need some sort of standardized approach where we can say and write to exactly kind of what agencies are looking for in terms of risk.
Thanks, Daniel. And Bill, and then Bronco.
I was about to make a joke about I think Daniel just reinvented 853, and we appreciate that. But more seriously here, I want to be contrary per usual and say I don't think agencies do have a very different definition of risk or how they're approaching risk. I think that this is largely mythological. Again, I used to oversee the entire federal cloud portfolio. That was my job, is looking at all of the agencies and how every single cloud service was being used. And we don't have that many weird things going on, aside from our friends at the Department of War, of course. For everyone else, like there's only so many boxes here. Most of us use Microsoft for identity management across our entire portfolio. There's only a few weirdos. Only about 15% of the federal government does anything different than that. And those that do are generally using Google. So we already know how all of that entire box is going to work and interact with the entire rest of all of our services. So that entire chunk of controls, like that's reusable. But right now we've only got the FedRAMP piece of it, which says this control family for this specific provider, for this specific vendor is covered, but not all the other things it connects to. Generally speaking, when I'm setting out to like write my SSPs, like if I want to get it through the pipe faster, like I go to another agency and ask if I can look at theirs. Like that sort of standardization should be happening at a higher tier if we want to make it go faster. But I mean, Larry, to answer your question directly, like how do we make it go faster? My agency, the fastest I can get anything through the pipe right now is going to be 9 months, start to finish for the security assessment piece alone. Meaning, if I have my documents in hand, we don't have the horsepower to do it. We don't have the manpower to do it. So the only way it's going to get through faster is if the paperwork can somehow go faster, or the tooling can make it so that I don't have to do paperwork. Like that is literally the only levers I can pull. And again, governments aren't, most people are not doing things that are that different. There's the reason why we have like the categorizations that are standard. Those categorizations are standard for information. Your FIPS, your low, your moderate, your high, and generally speaking, all of your practices are going to like flow from that. It's not really that different, not to be reductionist here. For the vast majority of civilian agencies, you're doing the same thing, just slight tweaks to how you want it written by your CISO.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. Bronco.
Maybe I misunderstood your question, Larry, but I'm a little bothered by that statement. It talks about adoption of FedRAMP certified offerings. FedRAMP certification is not an indicator of a need on the agency side. So it's not an adoption of FedRAMP certified offerings. It's certification of offerings that are not certified that are needed by federal agencies. That's what we need to focus on.
Understood. All right. Yeah, I just noticed that it's almost 3 o'clock. And thank you all. Let me quickly switch to my closing remarks, but this has been excellent. I just, really the strongest themes I've heard have been the ability to educate the stakeholders, and I'm intrigued by the identification of the IG community and SIGI, educating them as a stakeholder. The consistent theme of agency risk versus not versus FedRAMP certification, but in conjunction with FedRAMP certification, and how we better synchronize the two. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at our notes from today's meeting and help to focus in for the rest of the meetings that we're scheduling for 2026. And before the next meeting, we'll share some information with you about the themes and the desired outputs as we move forward. Again, I want to thank everybody for the outstanding discussion today. Thanks to Pete and the FedRAMP program for the comprehensive update. And again, thank you all for being on the committee. Please remember, and for members of the public, those applications for the open seats on the FedRAMP on the FSCAC are open until Friday of this week. So for those who are interested in joining the committee, please get your applications in by Friday of this week. And with that, Ryan, I'll turn it over to you to adjourn.
Thanks, Larry.
That's me.
Yes, as Larry said, we're 1 minute over. I want to reiterate that we have 2 open agency CISO seats. I think that the discussion today and discussions going forward will definitely be more valuable when those seats are filled, and we have folks who are sitting in their security offices at their agencies who can help with some of this discussion. So we're looking forward. We already have a couple good applicants in. If you have colleagues, friends, anyone that you know that cares a lot about FedRAMP, please share those applications out so we can get some good members to backfill those seats. And then there is 1 open seat currently that we will fill around that same time. And then there are 2 upcoming open seats. I will reach out to those individuals on the committee now. You are eligible to serve another term, but you will have to go through the application process. I will reach out separately to let you know when the end of your term date is coming up. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. We'll provide meeting notes, and we can use the next meeting to further elaborate on some of the discussion that we had today. Thank you all for coming today.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Phil.
everyone.
Thank you.